now we go over to Dr. Sir David Bell, and we're going to be chatting about the post-Brexit UK and the implications for business. And this is all part of the Henley Business School, which is part of the University of Reading, and is the first business school to be established in Europe in 1946. Dr. Why do I keep on calling you Doctor?
Doctorate is nothing. This is a sir.
Just call me David.
No, we can't call you David. That's sacrilegious.
You've got to be sir. You've got to be sir.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Sir David Bell, good morning and welcome to Kai FM 95.9. The first thing that we'd like to find out is that a lot of things have happened over the past couple of months. What insight can you share on what the post-Brexit UK may look like as this disruptive decision affects business in the UK as well as beyond?
Well, it's a period of uncertainty since the referendum vote in June, and I think in the UK and perhaps across Europe and the rest of the world, we're just trying to come to terms with what all of this means. At the moment, of course, Britain has not yet triggered the process to leave the EU, and that's likely to begin in 2017. So at the moment, lots of discussion, lots of uncertainty, and no real clarity at this stage.
Well, the Supreme Court judge yesterday said that the Brexit vote is not necessarily legally binding. What does this mean, though, for this decision that was made?
Well, that in itself is quite a big discussion in the UK. I think it would be very difficult not to consider the EU vote binding, given that there was a majority of the electorate in the EU that voted to leave in the UK that voted to leave the EU. So I don't think there's any serious discussion given that this won't happen. This is going to happen. I think it's just now a question of the means by which it happens.
Will this have an effect on South Africa and other parts of the world and the way that business is done with them?
Well, I'm afraid, again, this is a period of uncertainty. We know that South Africa, with most of its trade agreements with Britain, are negotiated through the EU. And one of the questions that's in everyone's mind at the moment is what happens to those trade agreements after Britain leaves the EU? Now, quite a few people in South Africa and elsewhere are saying, well, Britain would be able to negotiate separate trade agreements. That's certainly the case, but that's going to take a long time. And one of the questions that's been raised in the UK at the moment is, does Britain actually have enough trade negotiators to make these arrangements happen? So I think we don't yet know what's going to happen in trade deals after Britain leaves the EU, and I think that is one of these aspects of uncertainty that I've already referred to.
What happens with Scotland? Because Scotland said they actually wanted to stay in the EU, and with the United Kingdom as well as Britain saying that they wanted to pull out, it looks like they still want to stay in there, and they want to benefit from some of those trade agreements.
Well, as you might have gathered from my accent, I'm a Scot.
No, it's fabulous. It's wonderful. I just want you to hear you say, I want a red dress. Fabulous. Sorry, sir.
I have to say, I have lived in England for 30 years. Now, it's a really good question about Scotland's position. At the moment, of course, Scotland is still part of the United Kingdom, so it will be bound by the UK decision to leave the EU. Of course, what the Scottish Nationalist Party in Scotland are saying is, well, there might have to be another independence referendum in Scotland. And if you remember, we had one of those in 2014. So the political situation in the UK at the moment is quite fluid, but I think we can say with certainty that the process to leave the EU will begin in 2017.
The big question also is now, how do we change business models? If I'm sitting here as a business, if I'm sitting in the UK as a businessman and I now start wanting to do business in Europe, I want to start doing business outside of the United Kingdom, does this change because of those changes in trade agreements, the UK coming out of the European Union? Do I now need to re-strategize?
I think that's a really interesting question, because, I mean, those who were in favour of leaving the EU argued that this would somehow liberate British businesses. We wouldn't be tied into what they saw as the bureaucracy of EU. I mean, I think that's a debating point, whether there was such a bureaucracy that constrained British business. But you're absolutely right. A rethinking of strategy, for example, where companies haven't thought as much about export markets outside the EU. Maybe this is an opportunity to do so. so. And therefore countries like South Africa, other countries in Africa and beyond might see this as an opportunity through Britain leaving the EU to renegotiate new deals and therefore give new opportunities to South African companies and British companies in the wake of some new trade agreement in the future.
When you look at what's happening out in the United Kingdom as well as what's happened with the European Union as well as Britain, is there something that we can learn? Is there something that business leaders as well as leaders in South Africa can take from this?
I think one of the most interesting features here is planning for uncertainty. I mean, how do you do that? Because you don't know what's around the corner, and of course we are all coming to terms with the vote for a new president of the United States of America. And maybe the really important issue here is that businesses need to remain flexible and adaptable, that it's very easy to get into a rut, it's very easy to assume that things will always happen the way they've happened. But what's your business doing to plan for the unexpected? How does it remain flexible? How does it avoid getting into established ways of thinking and not really thinking imaginatively? I think that's the big lesson from Brexit.
And finally, when you look at, well, ideally bringing it back home, and you look at the African Union, and you look at the different sort of economic chapters in Africa. You've got ECOWAS out in close to the side of Kenya. You've got SADC here in South Africa, and you also look at what we try to do with BRICS. Are there any lessons that we can learn from there? Because it looks like countries want their sovereignty, they want their independence, but when you look at South Africa, when you look at Africa, if we speak as a whole, then we are a greater sort of economic powerhouse.
Yes, and I think the key issue there is interdependence. I mean, clearly the British people have voted for a new form of sovereignty as a result of this vote, but we are living in an interdependent world. The same is true in Africa, the same is true in Asia, other parts of the world. Yes, countries, businesses within countries have to be strong, but they also have to be outward looking, because in an interdependent world you have to be establishing outward relationships and maintaining and enhancing those relationships if you want to succeed.
Well, thank you very much, Sir David Bell. I just wanted to find something out. What does it take to be called Sir? My name is already McFarlane, so I want that title to be called Sir McFarlane. What is it that I can do? What advice can you give me to finally be knighted as well?
Well, you know, my children always ask me, whatever did I do to get knighted? Why did I ever deserve that? And, you know, I'm still trying to explain it to them.
So, David Bell, I think I have a suggestion. What he can do is he can go to Home Affairs and change his first name to Sir Wang Wang.
How do you know that I didn't actually do that?
I don't know, you just sound real.
But you sound like a sir. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure having with us here on KFM.